So Ben, thank you so much for taking time out of your current shooting schedule
Pleasure, Tom.
to join us here this evening. I know you're very busy, and you've come in on your day off to spend an evening with us.
Yeah, I'm unplugged, isn't it? I was night shooting last night. So, there we go. So, I got back about 6 a.m. Strange thing, night shooting. It gives
How
you,
so?
well, I think you work off different levels of energy, different levels of consciousness. I think you might be closer to your dream rhythm when night shooting. I know that sounds rather obvious, but I think you are closer perhaps to your subconscious and your dream rhythms and your dream images than you are in your waking hours. So I find that night shooting can produce some very surprising results from actors. They're perhaps less inhibited, and they're less trapped along normal channels of imagination.
Plus, there aren't as many people around watching you.
This
probably.
is true, but I like film crews. I'm often asked if I miss the live audience, but as you know, I'm filming. The film crew can be absolutely vast, and while you're doing a take, if you subliminally are aware of the fact that everyone on the film set is listening, you can gauge your work from that and off that, and use it as a very benign presence to bounce your capacity as a storyteller off in the same way that you would from a live audience. So I personally don't feel a great hiatus there, going from stage to film.
So what kind of surprises did this night shoot bring to you last night?
Well, it's difficult. You see, if I could describe the surprises, in a sense, they wouldn't be surprises. I think that's what I mean. That you don't fall back onto a series of preordained patterns in your imagination, because my dreams are completely unpredictable. They're highly imaginative. They're like film scripts written by somebody else, written by a different chapter in my body, a different layer in my consciousness. So the calmness that I had when I arrived on the set, I arrived about 9 o'clock in the evening last night. Friday, what day is it today?
Sunday.
Yes. Saturday night, and I did a quite a gentle rehearsal, and then just for camera. Then I went back to my trailer, went into makeup, got prepared, went back to my trailer, got back to my trailer maybe 10 o'clock. It didn't work till 1 o'clock, but that'll come as no surprise to anybody in film here. And when I arrived on the set, I was still very, very calm, quite up, pleased to see everybody, a little bit jokey with the director, who's always a little bit nervous when he meets me. Hi, Sir Ben.
I know the feeling.
And the scene, it was a closed set because it did involve a young woman in a truck being grossly violated by a serial rapist and a serial killer. And I, as an avenging angel in the film, come to her rescue and proceed to beat the assailant savagely. And the director, hi, Sir Ben. Hi. Can we have a word? I said, yes, of course. That's why I'm here. Could we have a word? It's wonderful, isn't it? Could we have a word? Anyway, I'd read the script, and I had learnt the scene, and he said, I want this to be savage, really savage. I said, what a very good idea. And stayed very, very calm until my magic word, which is action. And then the sequence involved a stunt double and myself, but the sequence involved pushing my fist through the window of the vehicle, pulling the assailant out, kicking him several times very violently, and then drawing a long hunting knife on him, having beaten him to the ground. And of course, I guess because I was so calm on arrival and my usual jokey self, and was not a bundle of violent neurotic nerves, the director was somewhat apprehensive that I was able to do the scene at all. I think there's a grain of truth in this. And I knew that because we were night shooting, because the whole of nature was there, the trees, the pine trees, this poor girl in this truck, the cicadas, chirping away in their total indifference to this girl's plight. I mean, nature is indifferent. This is what's so beautiful about filming. You don't have to act that. It's just this blind forest watching this horrendous act. And then my shadow crosses the vehicle. She glimpses my shadow crossing it, which was beautifully filmed. And then the fists fly through the window, and he's dragged out. And as I say, he's savagely beaten. And I think because I was so completely calm and ready, I fear that my director, of whom I'm very, very fond, was somewhat apprehensive that I wasn't in what he calls the zone. Of course I was, and I was able to, in this kind of dream time, although I can do it during the day as well, I promise you. I don't want to corner myself into having contracts night shooting only. That wouldn't be fair. But the word savagery, although said in a rather conspiratorial tone, it could have been said quite openly, was a very good word, and we did enjoy actually filming the scene. He did relax and warm into my method of working, which is to be not there outside of action and cut, poised, prepared, but not there. And only on that word action was I there, and I found night shooting that there were much darker areas of savagery in me, in the character, I mean. And I must make that distinction. Much darker areas of savagery. We'll get onto my dark side later. much darker areas than the script would suggest. And there were acts of vengeful violence and somewhat humiliating acts from me against the rapist that weren't there in the script. I called him a name, a certain phrase I invented in this sort of dream night shooting state that I repeated 2 or 3 times. I hear now it's become the company catchphrase for the next week. Oh, no. And other gestures too. So I think that because perhaps I hadn't determined for myself what the scene was going to be last night and allowed that safety valve in me, which divides the conscious from the unconscious, to be nighttime, in the nighttime, more relaxed, more open, and allow myself to use that as a storyteller, as a narrator. Because actors are storytellers, we are narrators. It's just that we don't have a book in front of us. We live the book, we live the novel, we live the experience for the listener, the viewer, but we are storytellers primarily. And I found that my capacity to storytell was a little bit warmer, more fluid, more plastic than perhaps it might have been during the day, with more people watching. Yes, it was a closed set, that did help. And again, perhaps not going along the usual channels of bringing that archetypal, horrible dilemma to the screen in a stereotypical way. And it's archetype versus stereotype that is the actor's as we all know, the actor's constant battle. One of my secret conspiratorial whispers back to the director is, if we have seen this in another film, then we must look harder to do it in another way. If we've seen this before, then we're not going to surprise, unless we can profoundly refresh what has been seen and heard before.
So what happens at action, this innate savagery or violence or whatever comes out for the scene, does it just well up and happen all of a sudden? Do you take it with you afterwards?
No, I don't take it with me. There are residues, of course, just in the same way that if I were making a sculpture out of stone, there'd be stone dust in my eyes and my fingers would be bruised. There are things that you do take with you. If I were painting, there'd be paint under my fingernails. There are things that you take with you, but the actor, we are we not? We are our voices, our bodies, and our imagination. Therefore, what residue that we're allowed to take with us in the normal course of our craft would be some echoes, some memories, some bits that haven't quite dissolved into the air that we might take home with us. But in an ideal world, and for the most part from my way of working now, they begin and end between action and cut. I think that my greatest ambition is to allow the camera to discover something being created rather than discover something having been rehearsed. And if I can allow the camera to film something that's being created, then I am perhaps allowing the camera to see the trapeze artist swinging in the air, flying through the air with the greatest of ease, rather than holding on to that trapeze or that trapeze, because that is not, I think, what the camera wants or what the audience wants. I think the audience wants to see that flight, and it's in that flight, that leap from actor to character, where the actor is actively creating the character in front of the camera, as we are actively creating ourselves in life. This is what we do in life. We don't have a script. We don't wake up every morning. I wish we did, but we don't wake up every morning with a script. We have to actively create each moment. You and I don't have the faintest idea how any paragraph that you or I say is going to end. We're actively creating it. And I think that the screen actor has the unique opportunity, as opposed to his theatre colleague, the screen actor has the unique opportunity of having a moment at its inception, a moment during its creation, lasting on film forever. And very often, these are the moments that are debated by audiences for years. What about that moment when? And I'm sure that those moments are when actors have allowed themselves, with some degree of courage or recklessness or indifference, whatever, a mixture of all three, have allowed the camera to film them becoming the character rather than wheeling in their character, plonking it in front of the camera and allowing, and saying, this is what my character does. I've no idea what my character does until he does it.
When people ask you about those moments, do you remember them?
I can recognize them. It's almost the opposite, Tom. I can recognize them on the screen only by virtue of the fact that I cannot remember filming them. I can recognize those moments on screen only by realizing, as I'm watching the screen, I don't remember doing that. I don't know how I did that. And that is very gratifying for any actor. And you may be fortunate to have these moments last for longer than 15 seconds, but they're very short. Those moments of duende, those moments of absolute oneness with the story and the story and the storyteller becoming one for a while. But I do recognize them in retrospect. Mm-hmm. But if I recognize them on the set, thinking, "Wow, take number 3 was a really good take," it probably won't be in the film. Because it's too aware, it's too self-conscious. You're fiddling and tidging all the time and impressing, and one isn't trying to impress. Camera, you can't impress the camera with acting. The camera is almost allergic to acting. It's not interested in acting. Camera is only interested in the behavior of the character, and this, I think, is a double-edged sword. But this, I think, is where the camera has done enormous service to the craft of acting and the subtleties that one can bring to acting. Enormous. It's been a huge gift. We've been able as a craft to move forward in a way that was unthinkable 150 years ago. To allow the camera to find the character rather than the character constantly auditioning for the lens. The lens is not like auditions. The lens is saying, you've got the role, now I'd like to film the character. That's what the lens is saying. It truly is.
Well, many of the characters that you've portrayed over the years, I found, and this is only my opinion, have I don't know, what I would call a singular purpose. You would call them a loner or somebody who's alone. The world around them either adjusts to that fact or they don't. For instance, and that brings about the conflict. For instance, Gandhi, Turtle Diary, Sexy Beast, The Confession, Twelfth Night, Tale of Sweeney Todd. These are all characters that were in the world, but perhaps not of the culture of that world. Here are some words that I came up to describe those characters, and these are just random. As I watched the movies, I would call those characters guarded. There was a shell, potential, forceful, depth, mesmerizing, unpredictable, posture, arresting, foreign, eyes, shaved head, despair. If you understand at all what I'm getting at, what is it about those characters that attracted you to them?
Maybe they find me. Maybe there is. Maybe there is something that perhaps as a culture we're frightened of facing, which is our own solitude, our individual solitude in the Rilke sense. Rilke described love as two solitudes that meet, greet, and salute one another. So he actually had an ability to embrace and celebrate solitude. And then, given that we are all utterly individual solitudes, what a miracle it is that the human race has this beautiful capacity to communicate, to form families, to form tribes, to form common allegiances, ethical codes, morals, religions, passions, and but I think that the primal building block of the human race is solitude, and I say that joyfully. I don't say it in a sense with any tragic implication. So perhaps that there is this essential solitude in its magnificence, in its strength, the essential solitude that would gravitate towards me and find me as an outlet, and then through me, the solitude is expressed as a genuine part of human life that must be embraced, rather than a part of human life that must be avoided at all costs. And I believe that, you know, as screen actors, there is a battle against a certain level of accepted common culture, which almost outlaws or denies the existence of solitude. And that if you are going through a period of solitude in your life, you need help. or there's something wrong, or you should find a partner immediately, as opposed to finding solitude an enormous gift from the gods, and any cursory glance at any great religion would probably lead you to days of solitude from these great individuals in what their texts would call the wilderness. That great spiritual leaders and intellectual leaders, all at some stage in their lives, have had a period of time that's called the wilderness years, or the missing years, or the years of entire solitude. Most of our great religious figures have this, so it is already built into our faiths, but at the same time our common culture is trying to deny it, saying, you cannot be single, you've got to go to a singles club, to a solitude club, and to wreck that solitude as quickly as possible. Of course it's testing, but I think that the roles that you've so generously alluded to are opportunities for me as a screen actor, as a fellow screen actor, to say to the audience, solitude can produce extraordinary results, self-knowledge, testing, expanding of limits. And in Sexy Beast, of course, it produced terrible savagery, but it was a kind of power, a dark power. But the man was isolated. He was friendless. He was completely unable to form relationships. He was able to adore. He was able to say, I love you. He says, I love you to two characters in the film. He says, I love you to Gal Dove, played by Ray Winston, and he says, I love you, Jackie, played by Julianne. So he's capable of saying that, which is interesting. But I think in the great mosaic of individuals, the little pieces of mosaic that we individuals are that make up this extraordinary species, to examine one stone in the mosaic as a storyteller, just as a storyteller, is perhaps one of the gifts that screen actors can bring to the audience by saying, here is a woman entirely alone, and let's look, let's examine this extraordinary, almost state of grace. I'm not talking about terrible loneliness and loss and grief. I'm talking about solitude, which we all know and which we all have, and we all, paradoxically, all share. And yet at the same time, I do have a slight misgiving that our culture is trying to deny that and turn its back on it. And I think we need to redress the balance a little bit.
And it's something we shouldn't seek, I think, is what the culture says also.
Yes.
Speaking of Sexy Beast, Don Logan, your character, obviously a loner, very alone, although he has no social boundaries when it comes to other people. If you were to describe him, or if we were to describe him as an animal, obviously he's not a herding animal. He doesn't need many other beings around him to protect himself, and he's not a pack animal. He doesn't need other people to hunt with. He can hunt by himself. I'm not sure what kind of animal we could describe him other than if we were to describe him as not a human being.
Well, the reason why Don's in the film is that he is a human being, and the reason why Don is in the film, and that's why, I'm sure that's why you've underlined that, the reason why Don is in the film and the reason why we have drama is as Hamlet says, to hold the mirror up to nature. And I think a good film script and a good screenplay and a conscientious director and cast will perhaps have the temerity to say, Don Logan is one of you, Don Logan is human, and Don Logan does exist amongst you, and there are many Don Logans out there. I think this is one of the great gifts of the film. So that to eventually, because there are moments of comedy, there are moments of longing from Don, there are moments of memory and haunting recognition of memory in Don, and a sense of great tribal loyalty to Teddy Bass, Mr. Black Magic himself, great sense of loyalty that I think are constantly attempting not to humanize Don, but to accept the undeniable fact that he is human. and that there are many, many Don Logans amongst us. I'm blessed by having a great writer in the audience who's a very close friend of mine, but I know that we both admire David Mamet, and David Mamet's book, Writing in Restaurants, alludes to the fact in Mamet's writing, he says that America, and by America I now include the whole of Western civilization, America is a society committed to the outlawing of tragedy. And I think that by introducing the Don Logans into our films and not making them unhuman, evil figures, but by making them vulnerable, flesh and blood, vulnerable figures with their loves, their loyalties, their homophobic terrors, the everymanness of Don was what drew me to him, because I know that they exist in London. I know that they exist all over the world, and I think it's great that we can put them in a film and to have and allow people to identify with them as human beings, not as extraterrestrial monsters. And I think there is a danger that there are stereotypical evil people in films that we cannot identify with as human beings, and therefore we say to ourselves, oh, well, we're not like that. There is no capacity for evil in me, but there certainly is a capacity for great good and potential great danger and destruction in every single human being. It depends on historical situations. It depends whether we are in Stalingrad under siege and are eating rats, or whether we're in a lovely, comfortable suburb of Albuquerque. It all is in the lap of the gods, whether or not the hero or the utter beast is forced out of us in order to find our ecological corner and survive. And that's how I approached Don. I didn't approach Don as evil. I approached Don as an unloved child.
You have several other films coming out this year, Tuck Everlasting, and there's a couple of more, Sound of Thunder, and they should be out soon, House of Sand and Fog. You're very busy.
Is yet to be filmed. I go to film House of Sand and Fog in about 3 weeks' time when I finish here. I finished Sound of Thunder in Prague at the end of August. I can be corrected if I'm wrong. I know I can any second. And then came here, and we work here till the middle of September, and then I begin my third film towards the end of September, I believe, and then I have a break at Christmas, and I do my fourth film in February. But there were 4 films we had to fit in, my wonderful agents and myself, and we managed to do it. Mm-hmm. And they're very different. They're all very, very, very different men. But they are loners, Tom. You're right. Damn. Nailed again.
I'd like to talk about Schindler's List.
So would I.
This is one of the films I think best shows a filmmaker showing the story and not telling the story. It was, every scene showed us the tragedy and the barbarity of what was going on in Poland at that time, and there were very few moments when a character actually came up with some narrative and told us what had happened before. And I thought it was brilliant. It's a great story, and I love the character that you played. He was in a very bad position.
I loved him
and made
too.
the best of it.
I loved him too. I really did.
When you do a film like that, is it difficult to look at the other characters in the eye afterwards? It's It's such a tragedy, and what is happening to other people is incredible.
I'm surrounded by screen actors. It's great because I can talk openly and freely. I have visited that period of history 3 times because I played Simon Wiesenthal for HBO. Then I was in Schindler's List, having told Stephen that I really didn't want to do another film involving that period of history and have another yellow star stitched to my costume because I found it very painful and traumatic. And then after Schindler's List, during which time I actually carried a photograph of Anne Frank in my Isaac Stern coat and would glance at it before some takes and say to this photograph, I am actually doing this film for you, and put it back in my pocket. And then a few years later, I was asked to play her dad. So I've had 3 visits in Budapest, Prague, and Krakow to that period of history, as if there's something in me that needs working out, or if I need to work something out for something or somebody and bring it to the light of day. There is a sense of bonding, of camaraderie when we as actors work on those films together. There are friends from Schindler's List that I've become since very close to, particularly Caroline Goodall, who played Oscar's wife, a magnificent performance, and she's one of our best friends. There are people associated with Simon Wiesenthal's life, he himself, whom I met on several occasions, on the set and off the set. So it is possible to meet and greet and salute those people again, knowing that we have actually made us as tribal storytellers perhaps some contribution to the evolution of our tribe by refusing to turn our backs on the mistakes, the terrible mistakes that the tribe can collectively make. And I think that storytellers do have a responsibility to do this. If we look at any ancient tribal configuration, we would probably find the shaman, healer, storyteller right at the center of that tribe. And I think that we as actors are still related to something undeniably central and vital and healing to the tribe. So I think of those 3 films as healing films because they allowed people to grieve on a colossal scale. And my misgiving about Europe and reading its history after the end of the Second World War, our misgivings should be that it was never given an opportunity to grieve. It was plundered and divided and then became a hinge point in another war called the Cold War, but it was never actually, it never gave itself an opportunity for collective grief. And I think the 3 films that I've been associated with, perhaps all of them, indeed all 3, have given audiences an opportunity to empathize on a huge scale and grieve empathetically on a huge scale. And of course I accept the fact that films like Schindler's List and Anne Frank and the Wiesenthal story might be too upsetting for people to see. I've heard, people have said to me, I haven't seen Schindler's List yet. I know I'd find it too upsetting. My counter argument, although I can't very well force them into the cinema, but my counter argument is I think you'll find it very healing. Because again, one of the things that I fear our culture might be outlawing is what I call a good cry. And I think a good cry is extremely healing and cathartic and good. it cleanses, it literally washes things out. And those the films that you mentioned, Schindler's List particularly, I feel was an opportunity for grief, to face up to inexpressible loss, and from grieving, then the next step is healing, and then the next step is some kind of a determination never to allow it to happen again. But without the grief step, I think that the other steps falter. That's why I'm so profoundly fond of those films. And if I may say so, deeply grateful to SAG for my Screen Actors Guild Award for Otto Frank,
Yes.
and Anne's dad. Deeply grateful. Thank you. Thank you.
So it is possible for people to experience those movies and perhaps change in some way. Do you see film as a forum for social change?
I see it as I see storytelling as profoundly healing. I see storytelling in the form of great plays and film, and of course novels, but more collectively in the theatre, where we experience things together as a tribe, which is how we first heard stories. We first heard stories together as a tribe. And I feel that this is, for want of a better word, and it's a misused word, I know, and I take that risk, I find it profoundly healing, because it stretches our capacity to empathize, to be in the place of the other person. As simple as that. And that's where I feel that perhaps cinema could be an engine for social change, incidentally. But I feel that good drama, a good film, comedy, adventure, whatever genre, is an opportunity for an audience to collectively empathize for 2 hours. And there are very few other spaces that offer that today. There used to be, but the cinema has taken the place of other places that used to offer collective empathy and healing. I mean, if used judiciously, cinema is a tremendously life-enhancing force. It can, of course, be used to anesthetize. Fine, we have to accept that. We have to accept that. But it can also be used to provoke, heal, stimulate, and amuse on a very witty, ironic, and high level. Can be very witty.
Speaking of SAG, what project qualified you for your SAG card?
Gosh, well, you probably know more than me, better than me. It must have been my first film in the United States, which was my first film. I think it was Bugsy. I think my first film in the United States was Bugsy.
For which you were nominated for an Academy Award.
Oh, yes, so I was.
Okay. You've played a number of characters that are from different places. You've had to take on many different accents. Do you find that easy, challenging? Do you enjoy that?
I truly did cut my teeth on acting in the classroom and at home by, I suppose, every child finds a way of empowering themselves. That's a natural right of every child. Every child will gravitate towards that which empowers it, and if it's guided well, the child will not resort to bullying or destructive modes of behavior. It will be empowered through creative forms of behavior, empowered by acting, dancing, painting, singing, the joy of mathematics and patterns. But it will find a way of empowering itself. And my way of empowering myself as a child was to imitate teachers, authority figures. I specialized in authority figures. I still do. That's funny, isn't it?
In the United States, we call that cutting up.
Cutting up. Nothing's changed. I'm still doing it. And at home too, and people who would visit my parents' house, no sooner had they left the house, crossed the threshold, that I'd have them dead on, and I'd do them to the huge amusement of my family. I guess I have a good ear, and therefore having had a good ear as a child, musically and as a mimic, it's allowed me, if I'm able to hear the accent, to reproduce it. So the very specific South London accent I used in Sexy Beast came from a sort of mosaic of men that I'd been acquainted with over the years as stagehands in London, drivers on film sets. There's a certain criminal fringe element that's very attracted to show business, and there is a definite overlap, and I must have subconsciously found these people completely compelling and fascinating. Therefore, of course, I didn't have to resort to any research whatsoever for Don Logan. I didn't actually ever go into a South London pub and stare at people who are like Don Logan, and when threatened with a broken bottle, say, "Oh, I'm an actor, I'm doing research." As these broken bottles came towards my face. What are you looking at? Nothing. Just taking a few notes. So he just appeared out of a process of osmosis, because I am very, very curious about human beings and their patterns of behavior. And I watch and I listen, and I find very few things more fascinating in the whole world than the extraordinary variety and dynamic and patterns of human behavior and individual solitudes in these patterns of human behavior. When I arrived on the set, Ray Winston, my wonderful co-star, said to the director almost less than an hour into the first day's rehearsal, because I flew from somewhere bizarre, flew from Los Angeles on a totally different film to Spain and was filming the following day. I had my first big scene on Sexy Beast the day after I got off the aeroplane. So zero preparation as regards London. And Ray had the grace to say to the director, "I know exactly who Benny," he used to call me Benny. "All right, Benny?" He said, "I know, yeah, Johnny, no, I mean, I know exactly who Benny's doing. He's doing Johnny. Johnny's a driver. Johnny drives, no, honestly, Johnny's a driver. He's doing my mate. You're doing my mate, Benny." He drives a Vauxhall. He's a driver. I said, "Am I really, Ray? How wonderful." Now, I thought it was very generous of him, because Ray is surrounded by these guys. Ray can walk into a pub anywhere in South London, and the big gold rings on the hands and the tattoos and the chains and the Versace suits and the shave. "All right, Ray. All right, Billy. All right." Everyone knows Ray. Ray is part of that world. Ray is right on that wonderful world where those he's right in that umbra where those two worlds meet. That's Ray. He lives quite dangerously, but he knew that character and he knew that world. And yes, I had flown in from Los Angeles. I'd had no prior rehearsal with Ray whatsoever. I arrived and did my Don Logan, and I was pretty nervous with Ray sort of listening and watching. And he had the grace to say, "Got it, that's him. I can tell you what he does for a living. I can tell you what car he drives. I can tell you his name. I know who he works for, and I know what street he lives in. You've got it, Ben." And I forgot about that for the rest of filming. Otherwise, had Ray not said that, of course, the danger is, as I mentioned before, that we spend the whole film auditioning for a role that we've already been given. And I think that's a terrible state to be in. And I think that as actors, some of us have been in that state, and it's demeaning and it's very frustrating. When you actually know you've got the role and you're still invited to, you're tested in the wrong way. Of course we're tested every day, but we're tested as to the character's behavior and choices. We shouldn't be tested as to our ability to portray the character in the first place. So Ray's gift to me was huge.
You seem to have a real strong chemistry with him. You played together very well.
Yes, we did, and a great trust, and shared humor, and we only once, I think, mentioned the parallel between his character, my character, and Othello and Iago, and how beautifully our roles in Sexy Beast were written. They were written so well, and they were so psychologically beautifully observed, that we could actually make comparisons with it with one of Shakespeare's greatest plays, and the comparison completely held true in the way that Iago, Don Logan, attacks Desdemona in the same way that my character attacked Ray's wife, Dee Dee, for her not infidelity, but for her salacious past, in the same way that Iago attacks Desdemona for her infidelity. He finds the crack. So the animal that we try to describe Don Logan as is an animal capable of finding a hairline crack in somebody within seconds and hitting that with an axe so accurately. So it's a very, very cunning animal. It's a very accurate animal. Don Logan's probably a rattlesnake without the music. Without the musical bit on the end of his tail.
Back to this, the impersonations and mimicry you used to do as a child. At what point did you decide to dig deeper and treat this as a craft?
I can tell you the afternoon. I can tell you the afternoon. I was very young. I don't think I was 20. But I was probably nearly 20. I had occasion to go to Stratford-on-Avon. And in the repertoire that afternoon, very, very hot afternoon, and Stratford by the river, and Stratford being in the middle of England, it can, as Shakespeare suggests in his plays, the summers can get really ripe, hot and heavy and still. There was no breeze, very hot day, quite beautiful. And I saw that there was an opportunity to visit the theatre that afternoon and see a matinee of Richard III with Sir Ian Home in the title role. So I tried to get a seat in the theatre, but I couldn't because it was packed. It was a great performance directed by Peter Hall, part of his History trilogy. And I was only able to get a standing seat, so I stood at the back of the large theatre in Stratford. Some of you may know this theatre. And if you stand at the back, you are under the gallery, the second level of seats. There are 3 levels of seats. It's a vast theatre. And I was standing at the back watching Ian Home be this extraordinary jackal on stage that ripped through life. And as you know, Richard III is 98 or 99% verse. So it's da-dum, 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 all the way through. It's rhythmic, pulsating rhythm, which is quite mesmerizing. And a combination of his performance. Oh, I also remember as Ian walked across the stage, because I wasn't sitting, to keep a direct eye line between myself and Ian, I was walking across the back of the theatre. so there were 2 of us. Sort of, I was tracking him, and then with the verse structure, the iambic pentameters of the verse, which Shakespeare introduced as a brilliant device to hypnotize his audience, and the heat of the theatre, and Ian, I fainted. Halfway through an iambic pentameter, I went down, and was revived in the foyer by this wonderful Warwickshire lady. This wonderful collection of ladies who work for the Royal Shakespeare Company. They've been there all their lives as ushers and program sellers, and she offered me a glass of water. Would you like a glass of water? So I had this glass of water, and I staggered back into the theatre and watched the rest of the play. And then I went round the side of the theatre, and instead of going to the stage door, I went to the riverside restaurant, which joined the green room of the actors. And I was able to tell them personally, David Warner, Ian Holm, I think Peggy was there too, Dame Peggy. I was able to tell them how profoundly moved I'd been by the experience. I had no intention of becoming an actor before this. This was completely out of left field. Of course, every intention, but it was buried. The child had not as yet learnt to empower himself through acting, put it that way. And I said, how do I get myself on this stage? And they said, well, perhaps apply it. They addressed themselves to my questions quite earnestly, because I think I was burning with curiosity and a need to join them. They were like gods. They really were. And they said, well, a repertory company, drama schools, etc., etc. But it was that afternoon that determined myself to perhaps become primarily a Shakespearean actor, because I found Shakespeare so thrilling musically. I found that the music and especially at Stratford, the energy, the muscular energy of the verse, the language, the intelligence of the language, the demands it made on the voice and the body, they were just way above anything else that I could have imagined. And 2 years later, 2 years after I fainted, I auditioned for the company, and I was given a role in the company. And 2.5 years after I was looking up, talking to the actors on the balcony, I was actually in the green room looking down at swans and tourists and people myself, and joined. Well, my first job was with a theatre and education company. And there were a group of 5 of us who travelled to schools in the southwest of England, and we performed plays for various age groups. Because my son is at RADA. My son Edmund Kingsley is at RADA. He's 20 now, and he's a very successful student in his 2nd year. I failed to get a place at RADA. I did a bad audition. And does anyone know the story of the RADA audition?
It's the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts.
The Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts is possibly the greatest drama school in Europe, and my son has a place there, and I auditioned. This is after I fainted, but before I got the job at the RSC. So I decided to audition for RADA because David Warner said, go to drama school. So I was sitting waiting for the auditions to start, and I'd learnt quite a good audition piece. And we were all waiting there, and this man came in with a clipboard to ask for the next interviewee to please go on stage. And he said, Christina Blange. And there was a complete silence in the room. And he said, Christina Blange. And I said, I think that's me. Because my scrawl, Krishna had become Christina, and Banji had become Blange. So my written name looked like Christina Blange. So, as a great start to my RADA career, I stood up answering to the name of Christina Blange. Then proceeded to do a very wobbly audition, because it's despair. Despair had hit me really. I thought, no, you're not going to sort this one out. I did not get a place at RADA. I then did another audition at a very good repertory company in the north of England, and they said it's a fantastic audition. but we can't cast you. We don't know how to cast you in our repertoire. So I sort of put 2 and 2 together, and they did make 4, and I changed my name from this exotic, beautiful name to another name, taking my father's nickname and my grandfather's nickname, and out of that comes Ben Kingsley. I did another audition at a northern repertory company and the Children's Theatre, and they both said, "When can you start?" So I chose the touring company, in which fortunately we did excerpts from great Shakespeare plays to 11-year-olds. Oh, there's another great faux pas. When I joined the Children's Travelling Theatre Company, and it was my first paid job. I was actually paid. It was wonderful. We were given our cast sheets, how they would like to use us in the company. And I said, "Is there a cat in one of the plays?" They said, "No." "Well, it says here to play a cat." And she said, no, actually it says to play as cast." Oh. So Christina Blange ended up playing a cat. And here we are, here's the result. But I did my first 6 months touring the schools, very tough audience, playing in the round. And then I was at another repertory company in the round at Stoke-on-Trent, and then from Stoke-on-Trent went to Chichester, which is a thrust theatre, in 66 and 67, which was very, very shortly after that visit to the Royal Shakespeare Company to see Richard III. I auditioned for Trevor Nunn, and Trevor immediately took me under his wing, and I was given really, really decent parts from my first year onwards. I was very, very, very fortunate.
I want to get back to what you had mentioned about your name change. Here in the Southwest, and especially in New Mexico, we have many actors that it's a quandary for them, ethnic actors, and they toy with whether they should change their names or not because they're not getting cast. And it can be a very difficult decision. Was it difficult for you to do that?
It wasn't. Probably because I made it almost at the same time that I became an actor. I made it 5 months into my career as an actor. I'd done my work for the Theatre and Education Group for about 5 months, touring schools in the southwest of London. And then after that, I auditioned for a wonderful repertory company in Stoke-on-Trent, as I said, which was in the round. And it was round about then that I remember just chatting with some friends in Manchester. One of my closest friends, Bruce Myers, who has since done many, many plays for Peter Brook. Bruce was a friend of mine in Manchester. He actually successfully auditioned for RADA and got in. And there were a few of my peers I could talk to, including limited but important conversations amongst my family. And it was arrived at quite quickly, mainly because I perhaps was comfortable with my father's nickname Ben, and comfortable with Kingsley, which was loosely based on my grandfather's name, who on the eastern side of my family was a great spice trader in Zanzibar, and he was one of the spice kings. He was hugely successful as a trader, and he was called King Clove. So Kingsley comes from King Clove, and Ben comes from my dad. So it's I sort of invented it, but it has for me, it has a strong resonance with my family anyway. So I've never felt alienated from my name, from the name with which I sign my portraits. I don't feel any alienation from that. As to advising others, that's difficult. It depends where they are in their career, and if it will help them be heard. If it's going to help an actor be seen and heard, then it's very important for that actor to be seen and heard. I became an actor in order to be seen and heard. It's quite as simple as that. And everything that comes with it, you deal with as a point of philosophy, as a point of storytelling, of craft, tradition, urgency, communication, empathy. All that comes later. The first step for the first audition, for the first job, is to be seen and heard. And if an actor feels that he or she would be better seen and heard by making either a great or a slight adjustment to their name, that's fine. That's and it should not be misunderstood or misinterpreted in any way. It's simply to be seen and heard. That's all.
Do you feel like you would have to change your name if you were starting out today?
All I'm aware of is an extraordinary irony that I changed my name from Krishna Banji to Ben Kingsley in order to be given the role of Mahatma Gandhi.
Now that's what I would call career planning.
I mean, what can you do? So what I'm saying is, if it's there to be worked through, it doesn't really matter what you sign your portraits with, squiggle, anything. It's the portrait that's important, and we are portrait artists. More and more, I think the screen actor is a portrait artist. That's why you use the wonderful word portray so often in our conversation, because that's what screen actors are. They're portrait artists. And this portrait appears on celluloid, and it's quite extraordinary. I think they're more of a portrait artist perhaps than the theatre actor, with some great exceptions. But for us, we can present an indelible portrait of somebody that will, and this portrait will be, in cinemas, in galleries, in homes, as a portrait for a very, very, very long time. So we are able now as actors, this is the great revolution of cinema, we're able as actors not only to deal with the totally ephemeral between action and cut, but to make that ephemeral leap across the circus net, to make that ephemeral leap indelible by presenting a portrait to the camera, which the camera will record. Anyway, if it helps an actor to be a better portrait painter, then do that little name change.
I'm going to go ahead and go through some questions from the audience. And I will call out the name, and you can raise your hand wherever you're sitting. First question is from Catherine Hahn. She's right up here. What attracted you to Suspect Zero as a project?
Well, Catherine, it's quite difficult for me to talk about it with any perspective because I am right in the middle of it. I'm actually in the process of sticking my brush into a mess of oil paints on my palette and daubing them onto the canvas as my portrait of this character. I think that probably I was able to condense it into one of my myths. Once upon a time, there were two knights who had to kill a dragon, the most evil dragon in the world. On their quest, one knight found his lady, but also discovered that he had to kill the other knight. And it's that triangle of revenge, quest, honor, solitude, the two knights, two avenging knights, out to kill something so deeply evil, the phenomenon of the serial killer, that I found very attractive. But I was, as I said earlier, the magnet was formed when I was able to roll the script around in my head and realize that actually, in mythological archetypal terms, you were presented with a wonderful myth involving two heroes and a heroine and something profoundly evil. And I think it's ultimately redemptive, but we'll see, because it hasn't come out. We haven't finished it yet. We'll see. This might all be blah blah, But it might all be a great con job, but we'll see. But that was the magnet. I managed to reduce it to 2 lines.
When is it expected to hit the theaters?
Oh gosh, I mean that's such an odd science, isn't it? Now, how they market it, how they do, it's really out of our hands. Where these various portraits are exhibited first. I would imagine, where are we now? Nearly September. I would imagine the new year. I would imagine.
We'll look forward to it. Tom Follett? Tom? Oh, way over there. Okay. Hi, Tom. How would you describe the differences and similarities between stage and film acting?
I have to defer to the first great film director I worked with on a great motion picture. I had worked with Mike Leigh before I met Sir Richard Attenborough, Lord Attenborough now, good Lord, and I had worked with Ken Loach, but it was Richard who was aware that I'd come from the Royal Shakespeare Company straight into Gandhi, and he described theatre as the process where we address ourselves to the integrity of the event, and he described filming as a process whereby we address ourselves to the integrity of the moment. So it's the integrity of the event for theatre and the integrity of the moment for cinema. There are definitions that for me hold very true. I've not done theatre since Godot. In 1997, and before that, the last great play I did was Melons by Bernard Pomerantz for the Royal Shakespeare Company in the mid-80s. So there were 10-year gaps in my theatre work, but I was able to go straight back into it, hopefully bringing what I'd learned from the camera and from the intimacy of the camera. And as I said earlier, I believe that the camera is somewhat allergic to acting, in that the camera only has a curiosity for the behavior of the character. Now, you could also say the same for a theatre audience, but because of the nature of the building, and usually they're not as intimate as this. This is a very beautiful theatre because it's intimate. And therefore, here in this intimate space, you can, to a large extent, witness the behavior of the characters rather than the talents of the actors, the tricks of the actors, the acting of the actors. But in the theatres that I used to work in, the National Theatre, the Royal Court, the Royal Shakespeare Company, they were by and large very big. And therefore, technique to project a characterization to fill the space was absolutely essential. So that's how I came upon the distinction between acting, which is not a bad thing, it's okay, but acting in order to fill a space, but the behavior of the character in order to accurately crystallize that into the lens. And again, holding the whole journey of a character and modulating it and guiding it and leading it and the audience through a 2-hour journey on stage, whereas in having rehearsed considerably beforehand, whereas of course for the cinema you do have these extraordinary leaps from one trapeze to the other, and then the editor puts those leaps together, and all you have to do, you must do this, is to be completely within the moment between action and cut, and not to be too concerned with the rest of the symphonic sweep of the film, but just that beautiful sequence of notes in the symphony that you are required to play at that time. So for me, now there are perhaps fewer and fewer plays, maybe through ignorance, but fewer and fewer plays that I'm compelled to do. The last 2 great writers being Bernard and Sam Beckett, and therefore the extraordinary writing and the sense of event that those pieces presented to the audience was unlike doing a Chekhov play or a Shakespeare play. They were different. They had a different dangerous resonance, and they dealt with very dark and dangerous things. So they were more like a beautiful ritual unfolding in front of an audience, to enlighten them and provoke them. So I'm more and more charmed and seduced by the camera and by the great directors that I've been able to work with, including Spielberg, Attenborough, Ivan Reitman, Phil Alden Robinson, Roman Polanski, extraordinary collection of wonderful film directors who are at the peak of their craft and have encouraged me to employ a kind of economy in front of the camera, which would be wasted on stage because the audience would look at someone else. You try economic acting on stage and they'll look at someone else. You'll be being upstaged by that person from the dressing room that you said good evening to half an hour earlier. Good evening, darling. Good evening, darling. I shall carve you up on stage in half an hour. Darling. So there's that. I actually remember an actor doing this to me. I was at Royal Shakespeare Company. I was given a gem of a part. I was given the role of the wig maker in The Relapse by Vanbrugh. And I came out with this most extraordinary performance of, I have to say it was stereotypical, not archetypical, this performance of the wig maker, who had the most extraordinary voice and had the most extraordinary physical movements and sort of hopped around the stage like a mad grasshopper with this very, very large wig on his head, which was white, and he was very funny. And the audience really, really enjoyed this character. Every time you'd have this little dynamite of a scene with this actor who decided, the man in the central role, Lord Foppington, decided that he didn't like the laughs that young Ben was getting. And he actually crept back and back and back. And after 2 weeks, I didn't know what was going on. I wasn't getting any laughs. Because actually, he was moving back on stage and forcing me to turn towards him, to act to him. And in this great big wig, the audiences actually couldn't see what I was doing or saying. And I used to come off into the wings. And I remember one stagehand saying to me, "What's the matter, Ben? You used to get loads of laughs in that scene. What's the matter?" And I said, I don't know, Jerry. I don't know what's happening. Maybe I can't do it anymore. It was very, very destructive and actually a very unpleasant experience because this chap was actually pulling me round. It's called upstaging. Simply called upstaging, and that's what it means. You go upstage and you pull the other actor around so that eventually all that wonderful stuff I was doing, and I thought, oh, well, maybe I should jump about a bit more, or maybe I should do it louder or something. But no, it didn't work at all. It didn't work. Later on, I was in a film with the same actor. And the roles were kind of reversed, and I was the lead in the film, and he had a lovely little cameo. And of course, stealing scenes for me is a complete wasted exercise. It's nothing to do with how I work or how I want to work. But I saw this poor guy on camera in a scene with me going, and waving his handkerchief around, blowing his nose, dropping sweets, dropping coins, doing everything he possibly could on camera to try and upstage me. None of it was in the film because the editor saw, what's all this? So there are differences between theatre and cinema that only actors know about, and it actually is very difficult to play those games with a camera, because with a good director and editor, those games are an absolute waste of time. Therefore, the camera is a more democratizing eye than the audience, who you can play with and seduce. And as Shakespeare said, you can get a laugh at someone's expense, where in the meantime, some necessary question of the play be considered. That's from Hamlet's advice to the players, where he said, watch your clowns. Don't let your clowns say more than set down for them in the script, because they'll start clowning around, and the actual meat of the play will get lost, because the audience would love to watch the clown. They all watch the clown at that end of the play. So I'm very, very much seduced by the camera right now. I'm very intrigued to see what would get me back on stage. Very intrigued, because the last two experiences were beautiful. We'll see.
Which naturally segues into the next question from Susan Erath. Susan's over there. Are there any roles out there that you haven't done but would like to do?
Well, I had no idea that, for example, that Don Logan would be my next role until I saw him on the page. Because, we were talking earlier about night shooting, and how night shooting can bring something very unconscious to the surface, that you meet the night and the camera with this other poem that's inside you, as it were. And perhaps I need to see this role in order for me to say, there it is. Until I see it, perhaps I don't know. It would be with that surface part of my mind, not the subconscious, but the surface conscious, that might decide strategically what might be better for my career, to have a go at this or that or this or that character. But I think that deep down there are very surprising choices for me to make that I probably couldn't answer or address myself to right now. Only pray that I'm able to recognize it when I see it, and I think I will, and then put it into motion and be able to play it. I am playing in the film in Prague, in Sound of Thunder. Due to some mismanagement of a time machine, my character dies, but then he's alive at the end of the film. In the film I'm playing now, my character dies. In my next film, my character dies. In my fourth film, my character dies. Tragically, in all three films. So, not being facetious, but I think if I see a comedy on the page, I'm going to absolutely respond to it in a very, very positive way, because I love to make people laugh, and I think that comedy on film is a difficult exercise. I feel that I don't do enough of it for various reasons, but as and when that opportunity comes along, I would imagine trying to give you an answer to a question. I'm not really answering it, but I would love to do more comedy on film, and hopefully that will be something that jumps out at me from a script, and not someone who dies in tragic circumstances at the end of the film.
You're credited not only as an actor with great talent and far-reaching talent, but you're also credited with having that enigmatic label called box office. Do you feel you have to reconcile, or do you reconcile achieving great art with paying the mortgage?
Absolutely. I think that to be a craftsman and to have that craft rooted in the well-being of your children, the comfort of your home, the security of the woman you love and the children you love. I've got 2 grandchildren as well. That if you can relate that directly to what you do for a living, I think it's an immense privilege. And I see a very strong connection between loving my little tribe, being allowed to be a storyteller for the greater tribe, and also through that storytelling and through the appreciation of people seeing and hearing my stories, being able to feed, protect, and enjoy my domestic life and my domestic circumstances. So, and also a side product of being, as you kindly say, box office, is that I have a lot of opportunity to teach. I did a masterclass at the university last week for David, which was absolutely, I loved it. It gave me so much back to do that for you. And well, but I think that if I'm able to, have a banner name, then I have to go back and use that with young actors. And I have to come and talk to you. And I have to struggle over and over again to redefine what I profoundly believe the actor's role is. And I think it's actually perhaps might also use that mantle, that God-given mantle, to address myself and invite us to address ourselves to what I think might be a crisis between actors and directors now. In that I feel that actors, because of cinema, feel that they need to bring the particular emotional state to the film set the moment they step out of their car and walk into their trailer. And that emotional state perhaps is wrongly enhanced and fed by a neurosis. And what you end up by is a process that is profoundly unhealing, where a film director is simply provoking a neurosis in an actor and filming it. And the process of creating a portrait is completely put aside, and what you're filming is the neurosis of a very insecure actor. And the actor's learning nothing about his craft in situations like this, and the director, he or she, is learning nothing about the process of acting. The process of acting being that jump between one trapeze and the other. The process being the actor becoming the character in front of the camera. The process being the actor pretending to be somebody else in order to tell a story. And more I find young directors who are not experienced in working with true actors from the theatre, vocational actors, but are more and more working with young actors whose neurosis sells magazines and films, and who remain unhealed, and who will, I bet you, resort to drugs within 2 years of being successful, because there's a terrible gap in their lives. They do not understand what they're doing for a living, and nobody has told them. So if I can just take advantage of 3 hours at your college and 2 hours here, I'll sit here and tell you over and over again what I do for a living, because I'm frightened that there is a genre and a modus operandus emerging where directors who don't understand actors are working with actors who don't understand their craft, and people are getting sick. I mean, people are getting ill on the film set because they don't understand what they're supposed to be doing. If they're playing a mad person, they feel that they ought to be mad 24 hours a day, and this is not necessary. If they're playing any extreme form of the human condition, and in every drama it is the extreme forms that we're interested in, no matter how ordinary their starting points. In the House of Sand and Fog, the starting points for the characters are very, very ordinary. A house is sold the mortgage and the legalities behind the sale of the house are slightly off. They're slightly wrong. It results in 3 or 4 people dying at the end of the film. So their starting points are very, very ordinary. So the characters have to be rooted in ordinariness. My anxiety is that more and more the actor feels that he or she has to constantly inhabit this extreme state. So that they're not jumping from one trapeze to the other. They're grimly holding on to one trapeze. And that's all they're doing, swinging in this vacuum and not daring to let go. I have worked with actors who have not dared to let go on the word cut. Cut, shouts the director. And they will stay fiercely in their character and are not open to any process of empathy or sensitivity to the people around them, which would indicate to me that their acting is getting less and less empathetic and more narcissistic. And narcissism is one of the cults of our present culture, as opposed to solitude and empathy. It's narcissism. And I'm very, very worried about this process between actors and directors and how it's really, really missing by miles in some cases. So I can't even remember the question. Sorry.
I think you answered it. This next
box office. That's
box
what it
office.
was. Yeah.
Yes. This next question is from Flint Beck. Right here. Of the adjectives Tom listed, refined was left out. In Sneakers, what sort of panache did Robert Redford take from you?
I really loved making that film. Phil Alden Robinson and an extraordinary cast. And it was great to be with a maestro, not only a maestro director who profoundly understands the process of acting. Phil Alden Robinson, Field of Dreams, Sneakers, great writer as well. And Robert, who is doing on a really great scale what I'm, fumbling around in the dark trying to do, which is to put back into the art of filmmaking what he believes is the true art and craft, and not all the terrible neurotic attributes that cling on. So Robert brings a purity to his work. He brings a purity as a director, and he brings a purity as an actor. And to therefore have him as a leading man in that film was steadying, it was inspiring, and it encouraged me, because he was so welcoming on the set and so secure in his own craft. It encouraged me as Cosmo to take great risks. I'd never played a character like him before, and I loved playing him. And I loved also allowing my character to really love Robert's character, and to be profoundly dismayed, baffled, and betrayed by the fact that Robert's character did not wish to become my closest ally in quote unquote ruling the world through little dots and zeros and digits and information. Well, I think it comes out of his purity as an actor, and therefore, if you are pure on set as an actor, what do you address yourself to? You address yourself to the purity of the other actors on the film set. It works both ways. We reap what we sow, and very good microphone technique. I think that's right.
It's perfect.
And I've watched him since in many beautiful films. But where I love to watch Robert is really putting his ethos into practice. The way he brought Brad Pitt into the world in A River Runs Through It, that he directed, and then to see him and Brad Pitt. And Robert basically created Brad Pitt. And to see him and Brad Pitt together in Spy Games was for me very beautiful, to see those two warriors fighting together, the two gladiators fighting together, the one great chief and the young knight. He has great authority, he has great grace, and as I say, puts back so much into our craft. Wonderful, generous man. A lot to learn from him.
This next one is from Paula. Okay. Right over there. Okay. How do you decide to take on a certain role? How much writing, how much directing or director, how much cast? How much do all of those play in, I think?
Well, quite a lot after the initial decision. And I think the initial decision is based upon two relatively simple things. It's whether or not I recognize the man, profoundly recognize the man, whether a little light goes on in my head that says, I know you, I know your tricks, and I'm going to put your tricks in a movie. Whether that light comes on or whether another light comes on, which is, I am very, very curious to know you. And I'm very curious to understand how you do things and how you operate. So it's either recognition or curiosity. And if neither of those come into play, then I can't empathize. And therefore, if I can't empathize with the character, I can't share him with anybody. Having made that decision, it's very, very hard to backtrack because I immediately start to plan the portrait. I immediately start to gestate. The character starts being born inside of me. He starts to work his way out to the surface. And having read the screenplay and having felt this kinship, recognition or curiosity, then it's very hard for me to accept that I might have to decline because I know that I will not or do not get on with the director, or I will not or do not get on with one or two members of the cast that will completely inhibit my chemistry. Very often, if I've reached the stage of recognition or curiosity, I have liked the script. The script is always the first step, always. It's no good if I read a mediocre script, somebody saying, well, it doesn't even have to be a mediocre script. I mean, a script that doesn't resonate with me. It's no good somebody saying, oh, but you get a chance to work with But working with won't make it a better experience, won't make that script a better script. You know, whoever he or she is. So it's generally a struggle having decided on a role and knowing that that role is starting to grow inside in dreamland. It's very hard then to have to take a deep breath and say, you know what, I'm not going to be able to do this. I had one of the shortest meetings in the world about a month ago in LA. This guy, I hadn't read the script. Unfortunately, I can't remember his name. However, this director came to meet me at the Chateau Marmont in the garden. And I had never done this before, but he was very uncomfortable. He was somewhat hostile. And he came and sat at my small table and he just stared at me and expected me to make all the running, inaugurate the conversation about a script I hadn't as yet read. I'd been given some vague description of it. And then he began to talk in a rather agitated way about the screenplay. And I asked him a rather provocative question. I said, do you like people? I thought we better get the easy questions over with first. And he said, why do you ask? I said, well, you don't seem very at ease with the project or talking to me about it, or I said, you know what? I said, I think we might be self-cancelling. I think that your energies and mine might actually cancel each other out. And by the time I got to cancel each other out, he actually stood up from the table, said, thanks for the meeting. And I saw him leave across the garden. For a while, I felt really bad. But then perhaps one has to be brave, bite the bullet. And because so much of what we do is dependent on chemistry, so much of what we do when we jump from one trapeze to the other, we are so dependent upon that wonderful guy holding the trapeze, the wonderful guy who's trained you, the wonderful guy who's said those ropes are not going to break, the wonderful guy who is there with the box of resin that you rub your hands in before you grab onto the trapeze. We are so dependent upon the agility and the chemistry of those around us. And I just felt that this chap would not protect the set and would never in a million years understand the process by which I was trying to work. So I'm afraid I had to tell him, look, I said, this is not going to work. And he, as I say, he left the garden very quickly. I think I have to get better and better at recognizing this. Because no matter how wonderful the role, if the director and I do not have that essential rapport, if we're not in on the same conspiracy, then nothing is going to work. I remember Roman Polanski on the set of Death and the Maiden asking me, he said, Ben, come here. I said, what? Because I love Roman. He's a very mischievous pixie. He said, sorry, Death and the Maiden it was set in Chile. Ariel Dorfman play, and Rafael Inglesi did a beautiful screenplay based upon this play. And Sigourney Weaver's character is convinced that during the terrible Chilean junta under Pinochet, I was the man who tortured her. I, Dr. Roberto Miranda, was the man who violated and tortured her for many months in prison. She's convinced of this. And she kidnaps me and enacts a series of vengeful acts upon me, witnessed by her husband. And Roman very simply asked me, Ben, did he or did he not do it? And I said, God, that's a brilliant question. You're asking me whether or not she's got the right guy. And I said, he didn't do it. He said, great. Don't tell the others, let's film it. But once you can have that, any kind of conspiracy like that, a key conspiracy with the director that does not harm the other actors, it just forced my character into being violent in protecting his version of the truth, urgent and violent in the protestations of his innocence, so that whether he was a liar or not, he was totally convincing when he was declaring his innocence. And any conspiracy like that with a director like Roman has to come out of Phil Alden Robinson and I had the same kinds of conspiracies. We were in on tricks, and if you cannot get in on the same trick with a director, it will never work. Recognize and embrace the character, but if you're not conspiring with the director to paint the same portrait or an exciting portrait, if the director's not standing at your elbow with the palette, you got your brush and the director's going, pink, yeah. I mean, no other craft does this. No other craft in the world does this. Purple, yeah, purple. You know, it actually can guide you into your palette of colors. And you don't say, what? Why pink? Never. If you're with a good director, life's too short. You just say, pink, I think you're right. You're right. It's a lovely process. But with this poor guy in the garden at Chateau Marmont, what can you do?
Well, I must say I've never seen so much terror from somebody who was not only tied to a chair, your hands were tied, your feet were tied to the chair, you had duct tape around your head and your mouth. You could do nothing but sit there and show what you were feeling through your eyes. And it was terrifying to watch you go through that.
And I really needed an extraordinary director to help me, because my whole body was screaming with vulnerability to such an extent that if anybody came, because I had blood trickling down my forehead for about half an hour of the film, and it was attached to a device, and occasionally the makeup man would go and I could hear this. I could actually hear this during a take behind the chair. What was this? He was a lovely French makeup man, and I can't remember his name now.
Well, I'm not terrified anymore.
Street down my face. But occasionally people would come up and adjust my costume when I was blindfolded, and adjust my makeup, and I would jump out of my skin because they wouldn't announce their presence. But then Roman said, "Look, I'll do this," and he'd put his hand on my shoulder and say, "It's me." And then he'd do my makeup and he'd do my costume and say, "Finished," and I'd step back, and I never once jolted in my chair. He has an extraordinary manner, Roman. He's a lovely guy.
Kristen Price, right up there. In the middle, or in the movie Twelfth Night, the Feste Maria Sertobi scenes were played in a very different way than I have seen before. Serious almost to the point of being somber. How was the decision made to play the scenes this way? Your Feste seems to get no enjoyment from the treatment of Malvolio.
I think that people who say revenge is sweet are wrong. Personally, I don't think revenge is sweet. I think it's very the sweetness is very fleeting. I think it's a very hollow thing. And revenge is something that fascinates me. I don't know why, but it does. And we can carry old scores around with us for years. And Feste, because Malvolio did not laugh at one of his jokes, and we often know that stand-up comics can be very vicious and somewhat manic depressive and dangerous in their offstage moments, and Feste is no exception. And I wanted to make Feste an all-licensed clown, a comedian, a court comedian, whose comedy was very similar to Peter Sellers, who was a terrible depressive. So that these scenes that were hell-bent on revenge from against Malvolio, I found would be manically jolly for a while, but then once the revenge had been secured, once it had been put in place, as it were, the act of revenge, then where does the avenger go from there? When we go through an act of revenge, once the act is complete, I can't see any progress beyond it. It doesn't evolve. It's very, very different from understanding or empathy or forgiveness or teaching that person how they erred by helping to re-guide them. But revenge is simply holding an elastic at one end and letting go of it. It smacks back into the person's face, but there's very little learnt. So I think that Trevor examined the play quite harshly, which for us was very releasing, because so often Malvolio and Feste and Sir Toby Belch and all those people are supposed to be funny. And you have these poor actors in these Shakespeare plays knocking themselves out, desperately trying to be funny, whereas actually the scenes are ironic, they're bittersweet, they're tinged with revenge. So I think that he actually threaded a very good course through that and tried to put a real family dynamic onto the screen. And for particularly for my character, the fact that Malvolio mocked one of my jokes publicly and actually said in public, "He isn't funny, madam." To say that to somebody who's a comedian and who thinks they're funny can be devastating, truly devastating. And that bitter need for "I will have the last laugh," which is a phrase we often use, is born in Feste, but actually, when the time comes, what's lovely about that film is that nobody laughs. It isn't funny. The humiliation of another in order to teach them a lesson doesn't work. Nobody learns through humiliation. And Paul Malvolio is hideously humiliated. And I think that's a good, many other ways to do the play. It's only one production. So the balance can be redressed the next time, and you can have people running around in yellow stockings going, "Ho, ho, ho, aren't we funny?" To redress that. But I think it was a good choice. I really do. And it made our characters very livable. They were real, made them real.
It was a fascinating choice. I was riveted to it. I kept trying to figure out what was going on. It was so different.
Yeah.
It was good. Good choice.
Good.
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Do you have an active inner life?
An active inner life?
Mm-hmm.
I have I must have a very active inner life. I have very long, detailed dreams. When I'm not acting, I attempt to write poetry, and I usually start with a blank sheet of paper or blank screen, as it is now, and allow something to come out. And hopefully, if I do nourish my inner life and have a very, very active, a normally active, healthy inner life, then I needn't worry when I come to the set, relaxed and open, a blank sheet of paper, because I know that perhaps my inner life, when the director says action, if I have learned my lines, and I do work very hard on my text, and I learn my text, then I allow that inner life to inform all the characters that I've informed on the screen. And a lot of them have come from my inner life. Don Logan is not a product of external research. Otto Frank, although I had wonderful photographs of him and read his daughter's wonderful diaries, he had to come from my inner life as a father, and my inner dream life and my dream life empathy of suffering on a colossal scale. I somehow find my inner life can identify with that. I don't know why, but I do. So I think that working backwards, perhaps I do have a very active inner life that I can tap into and use, I hope, fruitfully between action and cut. And I think that paradoxically, I'm at my most private between action and cut.
Jill Playman? Jill? Right here. Okay. What is your advice to actors about the importance of avoiding typecasting, or should actors take whatever work they can get?
It's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, if you've been typecast to a certain extent, by definition, you're successful because somebody thinks they've found your type and that you can replicate it with ease. But, however, all actors have an incredibly rich inner life. I think actors are. I think they're an amazing bunch of people. I think they're an extraordinary tribe, and I think they're very close to the heart of things. And if one is typecast, unfortunately, you're shutting down all those inner voices, and you're viciously pruning back that inner life, and only allowing it to come out through a tiny corridor. Now, within that tiny corridor, it might be tremendously articulate. If you're typecast an actor who's always typecast, I wouldn't find it a great burden or a halter around my neck to be always typecast as playing geniuses, because it would give my imagination a wonderful free rein. I'd find it difficult if I was typecast to play somebody who had fewer choices. So it does depend on the choices your character is allowed to make and the choices you are allowed to make as an actor. Therefore, if the typecasting process rears its ugly head, I think the best thing to do is perhaps to accept the work if necessary, because only through work can actors grow. We cannot practice at home. Don't try it. So we can only practice through our craft, through literally doing it in front of an audience or a camera, or both. And if you have to take the type again, then within that type, work very hard to realize that actually in that type is a totally unique solitude that is completely different from the other so-called type, and you realize you're not being typecast at all because you've broken the type. You said, you think this person's like this? You think this person is a type? I'll show you. You're completely wrong. And through your gift as an actor, you can break stereotypes in front of audiences' eyes. And this can be a very thrilling exercise. We have to keep working. We cannot take our cello into a lovely room for 3 hours and practice, because we don't have one. We can't paint for 10 hours. These things can feed our acting, but we cannot practice acting. We're the only craft that performs publicly and cannot practice privately. It's a strange dilemma. So if there's a stream of types, then let the challenge be, okay, you think this is a type? I'll show you. You're wrong. Surprise, surprise. You didn't think she was like this, did you? Well, she is. And actors can do this. That is our gift.
Colin Playman, right over here. What advice do you have for a 16-year-old looking to get into the business? For example, is college theater necessary?
College theatre is very important because it will give you a chance to be the voice of your peers. Your peers, your fellow 16-year-olds, will see you on stage, and you will have the opportunity to be identified with. Your audience will identify with you on stage because you are profoundly one of them. And college is a very bonding and a very close environment. And if you are on stage in a college play, you have an opportunity to play with all that secret language, new words, mannerisms that were coined yesterday, that are absolutely brand new, that no one else knows about except your peers. And you can use these subtly in your performances. And you can be seen and heard by your friends, by your peers, by your parents if they choose to come, by your parents' friends. But again, as I said to the other member of the audience, any ambitious actor has to start acting on stage in front of people as early as possible and learn by making mistakes. Learn gestures, mannerisms, versions of the truth, psychological gestures. Learn a vocabulary of patterns of human behavior. And the only way you can learn that is by testing them against people who are sitting out there and watching you and saying, that didn't work because it was funny. That worked because it was true. That didn't work because it was flashy. That worked because everyone shared what I was feeling. And you just have to start as soon as possible. Pay somebody to push you on stage. Say, here's $5, stand there, and when I say now, go,
Fred Lancaster, over here. What part did you turn down that you wish you would have taken?
You know, actually, there isn't one. There's not one role that I have turned down that I wish I'd taken, because when I was offered, the mission, and with Robert De Niro, and I turned it down because I was also offered Othello and Melons at the Royal Shakespeare Company, and retrospectively, I know I made the right choice. I know I did, because going back, returning to the stage, returning to that wonderful theatre with those two plays, the nourishing relationships and reverberation since then would have far outlasted any attempts at performing in that film that I might have made. So that's one example of choices, and I have absolutely no regrets about that choice. I've accepted roles in film. I've accepted roles that I regret.
Yeah.
Definitely. Not very many, but I have. But I can't think of anything that I've declined that I've since regretted declining. There's not been many vacuums in my life. There's not been many gaps. I've never actually had much time for regret, to think, oh, I should have done that, because I've been on to the next thing so fast that there's hardly been time. It goes through the shredder. I have this mental shredder, and things go through it very fast.
Is acting who you are?
I think it's very much acting. I have to quote a wonderful colleague of mine. She wrote this lovely book about acting, and she says, it's what I do with who I am. And acting is definitely what I do with who I am. I think that if I wasn't an actor, I'd still be stopping people and telling them stories, but I might have a supermarket trolley and a strange collection of hats. But I'd still be grabbing people and saying, do you know, once upon a time, that's who I am. That's who I am. I am a storyteller. There's no way around it. There's just the way my chromosomes were put together. So I truly think that acting is who I am. But the characters I play are not necessarily, but acting, the process of acting, is definitely who I am. Yeah.
We're just about out of time. Is there anything else that you would like to leave us with this evening?
I know that there are many actors here and their loved ones and friends, and I hope that this is a very privileged chair. It's a very privileged position to be in, to be invited to be in, and I just hope that we can all go away with this very simple, beautiful central thought that acting is storytelling, and not to be manipulated away from that, and not to lose that, and not to let that slip through our fingers, because of the extraordinary, challenging, wonderful crisis that we are living through, and how our drama is responding to that crisis. And I think it brings me back to the word that we were discussing with Robert Redford, our purity of intent. And if you, as a 16-year-old, have a purity of intent to become an actor storyteller, then you give someone $5 and you get pushed on that stage as soon as you possibly can. Thanks for listening to me.
Sir Ben, thank you.